the Fit and Healthy Athlete Podcast. Debbie Potts is here to help you burn fat, optimize health, and enhance your performance in life as you age. We'll explore metabolic health, holistic health, and actionable insights with guest experts and deep dives into health topics. Whether you're an athlete or just looking to thrive, let's discover how to become your best self. Let's get started.
Hey, it's Debbie Potts, and I am on a mission to help you train smarter, fuel better, and become the strongest version of yourself in the future. And today I bring back on the show a special guest, one of my mentors, Daniel Crumback. I got him to come on the show to talk about how to do the most accurate metabolism test to make sure you get the right data. Because Daniel is one of the most respected experts in the world of physiological testing, metabolic analysis, and performance programming. Daniel has spent over 30 years working across medical, military, and elite athletic populations. He has taught physiology internationally, led rehabilitation and performance programs in China, served as the chief technical officer in the 2018 Winter Olympics, and he has helped develop the science and education behind metabolism testing programs. Daniel is someone who truly understands metabolism from the inside out, and he knows how to take raw data and turn it into actionable training and nutrition strategies. So there's a reason I always go to Daniel when I have a question and want him to explain metabolism at a deeper level. So today we're going to get a better understanding of resting metabolic rate, RMR. How do we test your resting metabolism, as well as active metabolism testing, or VO2 max testing, or VO2 peak for some people. But before we dive into our conversation, I want to explain a little bit about what we are talking about today, because these tests can completely change the way you train, eat, recover, and age. So first of all, a resting metabolic rate, RMR test. This is where we measure how many calories your body burns at rest, your oxygen consumption and CO2 production as we wear a mask, and you're measuring that breath in and out with these tubes connected to the mask. So we want to learn how to do this test to get the best data, because we're looking at how much energy does your body get from using fat for fuel or carbohydrates when you are at rest. Is your metabolism suppressed or is it optimized? How well are your mitochondria working? And how your breathing mechanics influence your metabolism. So a resting metabolic rate test can help us determine, if we get the correct data that we will talk about today, personalized calorie needs. Thyroid and hormone influence, if we look at your labs and your nutritional therapy signs and symptoms intake forms I like to use. How about your stress load and your HPA axis fatigue? Because we're going to measure your heart rate variability, as well as looking at the breakdown of that into your low frequency and high frequency. Also, we can identify metabolic flexibility. How well are you burning fat to carbs at rest? And then we'll do it during your exercise. How well do you shift between fuel sources? Why someone may feel stuck with fat loss or energy? We can get this information from RMR and combine it ideally with an active metabolism test, because this is your baseline blueprint. How is your body functioning before you even start moving? It is so important, and I wish more people would do this test every few months or twice a year. Now, your active metabolism test, this is something I'd like to do every 3 months. This is the second part of the test, where we measure how your metabolism responds as intensity increases. You will see afterwards in your report your ventilatory thresholds, V1 or VT1 and VT2, your VO2 peak or VO2 max, your fat versus carbohydrate usage at different intensities, your optimal zone 2, fat burning, peak fat max, metabolic crossover point, and your true interval and tempo zones, your cardiovascular limitations, as well as respiratory and metabolic inefficiencies, your energy system strengths, and not necessarily the word weaknesses I don't like, but how about your area of opportunities? So then we can identify how you perform, how efficiently do you use oxygen, and where is your metabolism not working as ideally as it should. So we want to look at where your metabolism is breaking down, which is so helpful to help you increase fat loss, performance gains, longevity, but also middle age, how our hormones change, and how to improve recovery while avoiding overtraining, and how we can rebuild your metabolic flexibility. So this matters because so many people are guessing what their percentages, they're not using the true fuel source to figure out their training zones. They're using math, and they're guessing what their calorie needs are. They're guessing what their zone 2 is. And they're guessing how hard they should work out, and not knowing if that zone 2 is easy enough and your zone 5 is hard enough. And where is your recovery in there? Do you know if you're burning fat or glucose? So when we do metabolism testing, we stop guessing and we start training based on your real physiology. And that's what Daniel and I are talking about today. How to prepare for the perfect metabolic test. What RMR and Active VO₂ data actually mean. The most common mistakes people make, and that's for the participant and the practitioner, the person running the test. How to use this information to reach your goals as fat loss or performance or longevity. And what I'd like to go into more is middle age, how our metabolism changes and why you must adapt your training. I've been talking about this in many solo rabbit hole episodes. And how to interpret the results. So this episode is packed with insight that will make your training more efficient, your nutrition more strategic, and your results more predictable. So a few definitions we should know about. If you want to know what Daniel's talking about, let me just share a few things. So what is VT1? This is the ventilatory threshold 1, the point where your body starts to make more carbon dioxide than your breathing can easily clear. This is where easy aerobic exercise begins to feel a little bit harder. Ideal for zone 2 training and great for fat burning, endurance, and metabolic flexibility. So some people use VT1 to figure out their zone 2. I look at peak FatMax is the bottom of zone 2, top of zone 3, top of zone 2 is your metabolic crossover point. Now, VT1 can be thought of as your first speed bump. And then VT2, ventilatory threshold 2, is a point where your breathing becomes hard and you can no longer speak comfortably. This is where your body shifts heavily towards more carbohydrates for your fuel, and this might be more around your tempo, zone 3, interval training is zone 4, and then looking at where your race pace training is. This is important for performance and those who are working on lactate tolerance. So VT2 is the second speed bump where your body says, hey, we're working a little harder now. Then we look at VO2 max. Now, I have to say VO2 peak because I find that most people are not going to their peak, their max. So the first time they test is often VO2 peak, the highest oxygen uptake you actually reach during the test. So if you stop early due to fatigue, injury, or breathing limitations, a lot of people don't like that mask on. You have to get used to it. Your VO2 max is the absolute maximum amount of oxygen your body can use during maximal effort. This is your upper ceiling for endurance and cardiovascular fitness. VO2 max is the physiological capacity, and VO2 peak is more your performance you did that day. And that's why if you listen to Daniel, how much you need to rest to get a proper test, it's not what people are doing. Before they do your test, you want to taper 3 days before as if you're doing a race. Now, FatMax, I talk about all the time, and peak fat oxidation. Same thing. This is the exercise intensity where your body burns the highest amount of fat per minute. This is your personal fat burning sweet spot, often found in the bottom of zone 2, and the top of zone 2, bottom of zone 3 is going to be metabolic crossover point. This is a moment where your body stops using mostly fat and starts using mostly carbohydrates. So we see this distinct line. I put images on Instagram. This helps us determine whether your metabolism is flexible or is it carb dependent. How well do you handle stress and intensity, and how to fuel for best results. So if you're a healthy, trained individual, you'll have a later crossover. So you'll cross over higher intensities. When I was in my best shape and I did new leaf metabolic testing all the time, I was racing Ironmans and I would have my crossover point up at 160 something heart rate. And I was, I think, around 40 something years old. So metabolically stressed individuals are going to hit the crossover really early, especially those people that are training incorrectly. All see all of their trainings probably in their zone 3 where they're burning mostly carbohydrates, and their metabolic crossover point happens so low heart rate. It's kind of crazy. So this is a big reason I want people to do testing so they get the most out of their workouts based on their goals. Now, we talk all the time about RER or RQ. This is the respiratory exchange ratio. RER is the ratio of carbon dioxide, what you exhale, produced to oxygen used. So this tells us exactly what fuel you are burning. So when I get the raw data, I'm looking at the report, 0.70, 100% fat. 1.0, 100% carbohydrates. So the values in between show the blend of fuel sources. And this is one of the most powerful insights from doing metabolism testing. At rest and exercise, this is what I'm really looking at. Now, we also go into oxygen saturation and breathing efficiency. We can look at how well your lungs, your diaphragm, and your rib cage mechanics support oxygen uptake and carbon dioxide clearance. Inefficient breathing is actually inefficient metabolism. And then we talk often about metabolic suppression. If your resting metabolic rate is lower than predicted, it may indicate chronic stress, hormone imbalances, underfueling, overtraining, thyroid patterns, mitochondrial dysfunction. So getting your resting metabolic rate test explains why so many people middle age, high performers feel stuck. And this is why I really like to look at your labs, do heart rate variability testing, work on your vagus nerve, because if you're stuck in that sympathetic dominance, I think we'll see this chronic stress and the hormones and your underfueling all connected, causing metabolic dysfunction, and you'll see this in your metabolism test. And then we're looking at, are you burning fat or are you burning carbohydrates at rest? This is a real picture of metabolic flexibility and a big predictor of longevity, your fuel utilization at rest. And then we're giving you heart zones, personalized based on the test that day. That's why the test needs to be accurate and you need to be rested. It's not 220 minus age generic information, and it's not percentage of your VO2 max, predicted VO2 max, because that's math. We are using science. So we're going to figure out your 5 zones. Zone 1's recovery. Zone 2 is more that fat metabolism where we work in the mitochondria. Zone 3's tempo. Zone 4 is more threshold training. You'll hear that VO2 max workouts 1 to 4 minutes. And then zone 5 is high intensity, more the sprint interval training, more anaerobic. So that's going to be the 10, 20, 45 second sprints. And these zones make training smarter, not harder. And then also when we're doing interval training, by the way, I want you to go zone 5 down to zone 1. Zone 4 down to zone 1. So then we figure out what does your workout schedule look like and how long should you be in each zone. And then are you really doing interval training? Because most people, I would say, are doing their whole workout in zone 3. They're not doing zone 5 down to zone 1, back up to zone 5, down to zone 1. That's sprint interval training. All right, and then a little bit more definitions, breathing limitation and cardiac limitation. We can see that in the test. And then we're looking at getting this personalized physiology checking where you are, and then your energy systems used. We use the old word aerobic versus anaerobic, but that's kind of what we don't like to say. You're never without oxygen. It's just a change in the fuel source we look at more so. So that is what we're going to dive into. Let me know what you're doing to get your metabolism testing done. There's Pinoy has a website with locations around you. I know DEXA Scan is another company, and Fitnicity is another one. So you can find somewhere around your where you live to get tested. So let me know your questions if everything made sense, and I look forward to hearing from you. Enjoy the show. All right, I am excited to bring back one of my mentors, Daniel Crumback. He's one of the leading experts in metabolic analysis and has created a lot of the training programs for practitioners to learn how to do metabolism testing correctly. And we are going to dive into how to make a metabolism test the most accurate, as I'm finding out from a lot of other clients that are getting metabolism testing done other locations that it might not be the most accurate data. So what if you're doing this test and you are maybe relying on data that might be inaccurate? So we want to make sure we're doing everything we can do to prepare properly for a VO2 max test and finding our peak FatMax, our metabolic crossover point. How do we make sure that accurate is really a true picture of where your health is, your mitochondria, your metabolic health for that day you're getting the test? So if you ever wondered why you feel stuck and why fat loss gets harder after age 40 and why your energy might crash a little more up and down with your moods, maybe why your training doesn't match your results. So this episode is for you, as we will dive into how to prepare for the perfect metabolic test, what to eat, drink, avoid, and when to schedule a test so you can walk in and get the most accurate data, making sure we do a proper warm-up and the accurate protocol for you, as well as how we can use metabolism testing to measure your calories burned during the day, how much fat, carbohydrates, and the data we can collect from here, if properly done, that's not similar data you're going to get from wearing your Garmin watch, as your VO2 max might show in there, but how accurate is that? And DEXA scans and different generic calculators to figure out how many calories do you need a day, your TDEE, and all the other information people are searching for. So I want you to understand as well how we interpret your results based on your specific goals. So whether you're focused on fat loss, performance, thyroid health, longevity, and or rebuilding your midlife metabolism, we want to look for different clues and put all this information together. And there are common mistakes people might make before testing, during testing, and especially afterwards. So we want to make sure how I look at metabolism testing and correlate this data with your blood chemistry panel, any other labs, any genetics, to help figure out what is best for you, that future you blueprint. So we'll talk about hormones, sleep, stress load, gut health, your training history, and where you are, what you have been doing, what's working, what's not working, and how to create that personalized program, and how using this information we can get from correct metabolism testing the right way can completely change your energy, your results, your longevity path. So this is one of the most actionable conversations you'll hear about metabolic health. Listen to our 2 other episodes we did a couple of years ago on my YouTube channel, Coach Debbie Potts. Take some notes. You're going to want to know how to make your best self in the future, and looking at, if you do a VO2 max test, what should you make sure you're doing correctly to get the right information, and how to use that information to make it into your daily life. All right. I have the metabolic expert on the podcast today to clear up some confusion, Daniel Crumback, and you are all the way over, what do you say? You're in the UK, right?
Yeah, I'm in northern England in Cumbria, like about 20 miles from Scotland, that far north.
Do you love living over there?
Yeah,
There's so
I
many
mean,
places.
I lived in southern England, Chichester, for 2 years, where I was teaching at the university, and then I moved up here I was chasing house prices and what I could get. So I ended up buying a 1868 renovated church in a farm town of about 250 people on at the base of the Pennine Mountains, right between the Pennines and the Lake District, which are, the two of the most beautiful areas in England. So
Wow.
I get to live here.
You could make money on the side by doing YouTube videos of that because that's what we'll always watch YouTube videos of home made a castle into this, renovated it, and then they have, millions of followers on YouTube watching your renovation progress.
Well, that's what's funny is there's this show called Renovation Man, and our church renovation is actually on it.
Oh, I'll have to send me the link. We love watching that. So, anyways, I
Absolutely.
knew I could talk to you for hours, and especially today, I wanted to have you back on the podcast to talk about how to prepare for a metabolism test, a resting metabolic rate test, as well as the active metabolism or exercise test, or people know as a VO2 max test, because I'm finding a lot of people are getting tests done other locations. And I always question the data when I ask them, how did the person doing the test conduct the test and what did they do beforehand and how did they pick the protocol and all that. So I wanted you to help kind of clarify, how do we get the best data from a test? So
All
why do
right.
you think this is an important conversation?
It obviously, if they don't go into the an RMR test appropriately, and I'll describe more of what that means, or a VO2 test, then the information that you're going to get is going to be faulty. It's as important as picking the right modality and the right protocol itself.
Mm-hmm.
A bad test gives you bad data, and it makes analysis almost impossible. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore, the conclusions you can make from the analysis and the recommendations you make will be negatively affected by that. So, some of it's logistical. So some of it is just how you do business. So I always do an RMR and a VO2 max. And generally I'll start with a ramp VO2 max
Mm-hmm.
because there's other protocols that are available. Um, I just like to be able to have that data because a lot of people will just do VO2 maxes, but you're missing a lot of metabolic health by not doing an RMR, especially with O2 and CO2. Because with O2 and CO2, you get fat and carbohydrate concentrations as well. So you get an idea of how much fat and carbohydrate they burn at rest, which is a strong indicator of how they're eating and how they're training and how metabolically sound they are. So I will always do both. Now, if they have a really good RMR in the first place, meaning that they have their basal metabolic rate is either average, high average, or high, meaning that they burn a higher amount of calories than others their age and gender itself, which is a strong indicator of good lean muscle mass and a good metabolic system. I will not tend to retest the RMR significantly unless they have a weight loss goal
Mm-hmm.
itself. But RMRs tend to change very slowly, so I tend to spread that out more to about once every 6 months. So that's one of the reasons why I'll always do an RMR and a VO2. Now, to prepare for an RMR and a VO2 is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll combine them together as part of the conversation. Some people will do an RMR, they have to be fasted. And some people will really shorten the fasting time, which is a real mistake. Because of the fact that in order for the number to be correct, they need to be fully fasted.
Which means
So
how many hours?
I prefer overnight. So, nothing after 9 o'clock because you get a 12-hour fast going into 9 o'clock the next morning, meaning that the only thing they're allowed is water. So they're not allowed anything in the morning, no food,
Coffee?
no coffee, no stimulants, even if they smoke, no smoking, and no use of vapes. So it's just strictly
Never thought of that. So I guess people vape now still.
they
I wouldn't
do
think
they
about
do
that.
So that they got to come in absolutely fasted to get a valuable RMR and BMR, and
Mhm.
especially the fat and carbohydrate utilization. It needs that. So my guys will tend to fast overnight. If they are an afternoon assessment, then they can have breakfast because you're still going to get greater than 6 hours before you test them. So my minimum amount of time is 6 hours. Okay. So um, then related to the VO2, no heavy workouts, no high intensity workouts for at least 72 hours before. So they can 3 days before they can do that. The day before is complete rest, and the day before that, like this, the day two, they can do a light workout, and the day before is complete rest. Now, that's to ensure that what you're doing is you want them to perform maximally during the test. I don't believe in doing sub-max tests. Why? Because I don't have any data then.
Mhm.
To do a sub-max, the rest of it's all a guess. You don't have their ventilation. You have no idea of the fat and carbohydrate they're using. You just don't have any data. It's an extrapolated VO2 max, and you're going, the only thing you're going to do is getting a guesstimate of
Mhm.
where they finish. So I always do a maximal test.
Wait, with someone that's doing a submax, they're stopping it at what point?
Well, they'll look for a certain RER.
Mm.
So they'll look at the ratio between the CO2 being produced and the O2 being utilized. Um, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never had to call an ambulance on anybody because those people that are deconditioned, their level of effort is significantly low as far as intensity is concerned. So they'll naturally limit themselves. And the other thing is to really make it clear whether you achieved a VO2 max or a VO2 peak.
Mhm.
A peak is easy to identify because your O2 utilization is continuing to climb at the end of the test, and a max has to plateau or decline. So my guys are always told the same things. They're actually asked to bring a snack or a gel or a drink, whatever they normally use. I will do the RMR, and the RMR is you really need to talk to people. It needs to be in a quiet, temperature-controlled room. There is real debate about whether they can do anything during it, but I always remind people what we're looking for is looking for a combination of how they breathe when they're sleeping, because you want to capture those other times that they're not active, and we want to capture if they're relatively sedentary. So if they're reading a book, they're watching TV, they're working on their computer on nothing particularly exciting, they're staying off the bad sites, and so they're just breathing normally. One of the biggest issues that we have is the fact that people, as soon as you put a tube in their mouth or a mask on their face, they'll change their breathing style. And with so many people doing reading on breathing, you really need to watch how they're breathing during the test because breath will change all the numbers. So I always warn people that, like with the core device that I use, I can see the breathing frequency and their tidal volumes during the test. If I see the breathing frequency is sitting at like 6 or less, they're not breathing normally. Nobody breathes 6 breaths a minute at rest. It's more like 10 to 14,
Mhm.
and depending on their size, somewhere around 500 mils to about 800 mils per breath. But I will look at tests where they're 2 breaths a minute and 1.6 liters, and you're just going, your test is useless now because you adjusted your breathing, and therefore the breathing is
Mhm.
everything when it comes to the RMR.
Yes.
So it's really important that you do a really good job of talking to your client beforehand. and stay in the room. And if you're lucky enough to do what I can do, I can see their numbers and say, quit jerking around. You're not in yoga class for, 14 hours a day. Okay. And yes, I'm impressed with the fact you can control your breathing at rest, but so what? But we need to capture that to get really good data. The other thing that people do with RMRs that are too short or wrong is that it's too short.
Mhm.
An RMR that lasts 10 minutes is absolutely useless.
I've found
It-
that too. I always go more than
yeah.
10.
It's got to be, I set my device for 10 to 20 minutes.
Hmm.
Um, and with the core, it's looking for a resting state to be achieved. It will end the test when it feels that it's collected the data at a resting state.
Uh-huh.
But, when I set it for 10 to 20 minutes, they usually end at 18.
Mm.
It takes that long
Yeah.
to be able to do it. So, again, just properly fasted coming in. They need to
Mhm.
be relaxed, the room, no, limited noise. I am very big about lights. Some people are freaked out. Like you really need to know their personalities and be able to say, would you prefer? There's a lot of would you prefer? Lights on, lights off. Door open, door closed. Uh, you know, a lot of people with ADHD have a hard time sitting still for 20 minutes, right? So you try and get to know their personalities because ultimately your goal is to achieve them to breathe in a manner that represents them at rest.
Yeah. And
So,
not have their phone or watch on. Or I've found that Apple watches or anything completely distract and
yeah.
interrupt the test.
Well, part of the reason why I put a heart rate monitor on my guys for an RMR, not a lot of people do it, but I do it, is because I want to know if they're moving.
Mm-hmm.
The breathing can be manipulated without any movement, but the heart rate
Hmm.
can't. So
Hmm.
I'll put the heart rate on them. And then there's the methodology about where in that 20-minute test do you pick? You need to select a certain point in the test to do your analysis. You're not going to take the data at the beginning when they're coming down and relaxing because maybe
Hmm.
the first 3 to 5 minutes they're just going into a resting state. Usually, if they know the test is about 20 minutes long, they start coming out of it at around 18, 19 minutes because they go, Jesus, it's got to be about 20 minutes. So it's just natural human side,
Hmm.
right? So you can, for example, certain devices give you no options of
Hmm.
how you analyze it. With the core, because we use a mixing chamber, so a totally different technology than using flow sensors, is that because we sample directly from inside the box itself, it can adjust and calibrate to keep everything accurate. In other words, temperature and humidity changes will make a massive difference to your calculations. So if you don't have a device that continuously calibrates, then the longer the test goes, the more inaccurate it is because it's calibrated at the beginning only. So I just think it's extremely important to be able to get an accurate test because it's going to be the basis of a lot of what you do for nutrition. It also, believe it or not, an RMR will tell you whether they need to do resistance training or not.
Hmm.
And so that's really good. I move them from the RMR. I get them up. In my case, I do spirometry because I like to be able to look at respiratory function. Then I tell them that they can eat or drink whatever they wish. Some people say, well, you're doing your VO2 max fasted and you're going, it's not going to make any freaking difference. There's plenty of carb and fat on board for a 9 to 12-minute test. So it's not going to make a difference. I do that just strictly because they're probably hungry. And it's probably something they do when they train anyway. So I let them, this is where they can have that. Then what I do is, as you know, is I'll do my parameter check to determine the protocol that I'm going to use for the VO2 max test.
Hmm.
And because they're well rested going into it, I can get a maximal effort from them.
So just to clarify, so we did the resting metabolism test, say about 20 minutes. And as a person conducting the test, you're taking say, 5 minute piece of that, or how long of chunk do you take to find data?
So what in this particular case, yeah, most cases it's 5 minutes. So for example, with the Coric, it allows you to be able to pick best five, and it will indicate which 5 minute segment it picked.
Mhm.
If you don't like it, and you go, well, actually, the last 5 minutes is the best part, you can pick last five, or you can pick what's is only available, which is the Douglas bag method, which again, it'll pick a certain section, but it will look at the gases over the whole time. So, Douglas bag method is only available with mixing chambers. So it's the usual method used at universities and research centers. But what's really cool is if you look at the data yourself, you can go, where did it pick best five? I don't like that spot. I prefer a different spot. That would be more accurate and more representative of their BMR. Then you can switch it. A lot of people don't think of any of this stuff. What they do is they'll bang out a 10-minute test and it punches out a report. They have no idea how the report was actually built on based upon what data during that time at all. They have no control over it. So it's, your method of analysis is extremely important uh, for RMR and for VO2 max.
Mhm. So just before we go to the VO2 max test, the RMR, we're gathering this information and we can extrapolate to figure out how many calories they're burning at rest. So the RMR, and you're figuring out if you burn so many calories at rest on top of that with exercise and then just daily activity movements. Do you find that to be accurate, how you're coming up with different numbers?
Well, some people will use what's referred to as PAL, right? So you essentially it asks you, would you rate your job as being like very strenuous, inactive, sedentary, extremely sedentary. So there's a range. And what that will do is will give you an average number of calories that you could add on to your BMR. And the BMR is what you get from our device. Now, when you look at the PAL, it should be related, not just pulled off the chart for somebody that age and gender and used
Mhm.
based upon their level of effort that they use. If they're slow metabolism, it should be adjusted down because, of course, that part will be down as well. And if they're fast, it should be adjusted up. So that's what the core does, is it uses PAL, but it bases it upon where they fit in the percentiles between a slow and a fast metabolism. I don't honestly put anything in the activity. I find it absolutely useless to try and guess exercise, caloric, fat, and carbohydrate from an RMR. You can't get it. So I always put zero. I just say ignore the activity side. I always leave it blank because it depends on, as you know, the duration and the intensity of the workout. So it's really not helpful. It's a bit confusing to people. So I just don't bother putting that in because I know I'm going to do a VO2 max with
Yeah.
O2 and CO2, and that's going to give me all the caloric and fat and
Mhm.
carbohydrate burn at all the different intensities.
So the benefits of doing the RMR test that you're using this data for, and then combine it, we'll get to the active test next. But the benefits I find the resting is metabolic health and the mitochondria and looking at do they need more strength training or cardio based on kind of getting into mTOR versus the AMPK pathway I've been talking about. But it's
Right.
to me, it's looking at the metabolism and then correlating that data with their blood chemistry panel and looking at their other data and their thyroid health and their insulin and all that. I find that beneficial. What do you find the most benefits from the RMR?
Yeah, I number one, metabolic health for sure. It will definitely red light somebody's diet. There's no way. I've looked at recent as you know, I analyze tests from people testing all over the world. So they send me their stuff and I look at it and I can describe that person to a T, no matter it. I've never met them before. I have no indication but of who they are.
Mhm.
but I can absolutely tell you that this person eats too many simple carbs
Mm.
because I have had tests and they've been 100% carb and 0% fat at rest. And you're going, that's essentially, you would call that metabolic syndrome or diabetes, right? That's a lot of really bad training at a wrong intensities mixed with a horrible diet. So those things that give you these flags allows you to be able to address them. And so it makes a massive difference. And like you said, to me, one of my key things with an RMR is it whether I need to prioritize resistance training or not. And unfortunately, as you know, everything's generalized so much in the world today, where it's sort of like, well, if you're overweight, everybody that's overweight that wants to lose weight should do resistance work because it'll increase your basal metabolic rate. And you're going, yeah, well, what if they're already fast? Aren't you,
Mhm.
you're going to waste their time with doing it. But if they're slow, you're not. You're gonna make some really good gains. So you can be much more accurate and specific with your prescription that way.
Mhm. Yeah, and I find it also you're speaking to looking at how much fat to carbohydrates they're burning at rest and how important that is, and looking at their labs and what they're doing, how they're eating, and their stress too, because it's the chronic
Yeah.
stress impact on our fuel availability. I think is part of it too. They see more carbohydrates being burned, perhaps with some people that are chronic stress mode, always raising the glucose from their stress level.
Well, but what's really interesting is that, like, I always hate it when people talk in isolation or they talk about one aspect.
Yes.
People that are stressed also tend to use food,
Uh-huh.
bad food,
Yeah.
as being a relief to their stress.
Yeah.
So nothing happens in isolation.
Mhm.
Usually there's three or four things that are feeding into this that will change the blood panel, that will change an RMR, that will change
Mhm.
the fat carbohydrate. It's usually not one thing.
Yeah.
I tend to concentrate on how I address things, which is nutrition and exercise more. But I do think in a lot of cases you can capture a lot of pre-medical conditions fairly easily just by doing that. And they don't know that they're actually on the edge of being ill, being diagnosed with the condition, being prescribed medication, but you can see it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
hopefully you can change it. And you can change those that have already been diagnosed and are on medication and say, well, do you want to be on medication the rest of your life, or do you want to be able to make a few changes that is going to bring you away
Mhm.
from that?
Yeah.
So it's yeah,
That helps. Yeah, I think
yeah,
it's understanding. I always think of it as we've spoken before, the three categories that you're doing testing, people are trying to lose weight. And then there's a performance for athletic performance and figure out how to personalize a workout program or training plan if they're racing. And then there's longevity and
yeah,
some all of the above. But I think it's that I feel that the testing is marketed in the past VO2 max to people that are just athletes, and how
yeah,
important it is for anyone concerned about their future self, how well they age, is trying to get them to do testing, that it's more important for longevity health to get this data and being a health optimizer. So as you just said, we can catch things earlier and then figure out how to course correct and change and personalize your own program so you are improving how you age and not having different illnesses come up that you didn't know about.
absolutely. And perhaps even more important because the fact that a higher level athlete will have more time to train.
Yeah.
So, if they only have a 3 1-hour blocks in a week, they can't afford to make a mistake
Mhm.
in the general population,
Yeah.
and if they have really limited capacity, you better make sure that what you give them to do during that limited space is absolutely right thing to do at the right time, at the right intensity, in the right order. Those are all the things that have to be put in place.
hmm So let's transition that into the exercise test, the active metabolism or VO2 max, whatever you prefer to call it, and how important the data we collect, but how we want to make sure we have accurate data for that test that day and time on that person's health how they were that day, how to make it the best results, starting with, we went over kind of prep the days up, which most people don't rest as that. They just go do
No.
the test. And I'll add that I find a lot of places are doing the test without any warm up, and they're not doing a personalized program. They're just picking one of the options for a test protocol. So speak to how we can get the most out of doing a test if you're the participant.
I would say number one, remember why you're doing the tests and what data you were after. Don't let the protocol run you.
Mm.
It's you've got to be able to adjust the protocol to give you the all the important things that you need in the time frame that would meet. Not too short, not too long, to be able to get a VO2 max. So, and there's many different ways of testing, and I use a bunch of different methods of testing, but let's stick with a classic ramp test,
Yeah.
which is kind of the classical VO2 max. I do them all the time. I as when I teach it, I tell people never shorter than 9 minutes, never longer than 12, and that should be your goal. Why never shorter than nine is your data is not there. It's a nice simple thing is you need enough data to be able to see physiological changes over time. Never longer than 12 because you want your intensity to ramp up at a level in which they can actually achieve a VO2 max. So I try and keep my test between 9 and 12, not including my 5 minute warm up. So why the warm up? There's a myriad of reasons. Number one, you need to get them into kind of homeostatic level to be able to identify the beginning of the changes at the beginning of the test. Otherwise, you have no baseline to compare the changes in the rest of the test. The other is you strap a mask to them, you put them in a stressful environment, give them 5 minutes just to get into exercising. They'll forget about everything else at that point. Their breathing will settle in, their heart rate will settle down, and they'll just get used to the test. And I do a 5 minute warm up now. How I identify where the warm up is because the warm up is different for every person. Obviously, you can't use the same speeds for somebody who is, let's say, somebody who is just a beginning runner versus an elite athlete. Their warm up's going to be totally different speeds. So it can't be speed dependent. So I use heart rate. Now, logically, your base, you don't, there's certain things that you should be looking for zoning and for physiological data, and that is FatMax. And you're looking for what we refer to as crossover, where carbohydrate starts to contribute more to the energy or ATP production than fat. If you start too hard, you're going to miss it. And therefore, your test doesn't give you the data that you needed. You're actually shooting yourself in the foot. So, a simple concept that I use is I do a parameter check, but my goal is to try and set them to be their warm up is between 90 and 100 beats. And 99 times out of 100, you will not miss fat max. It
They're
will
keeping
be,
5 minutes at 90 to
yeah.
100 heart rate.
Yeah. And 90% of the time, you're going to find that fat max is there or slightly higher in the first step, but you'll never miss it. So, obviously, instead of using speed, if you use heart rate, it'll be whatever speed is appropriate for that individual to achieve that heart rate. There's going to be the odd person that has extremely high heart rates. They're 220, 240 beats. You're never going to get them down to 90 because they pick their nose and they're at 150. So it's sort of like, yeah, is going to be exceptions to this, but you know who they are,
Mhm.
you know. But if you do that and you let them settle in for 5 minutes, what you'll see is their heart rate will start a little bit higher, it'll drop down and then be flat. So you're getting that nice baseline for about 4 minutes before you apply the first load uptick. The test really starts after the 5 minutes.
So this is with the mask on, so you're all
Yep.
set up, 5 minute warm up, and then you're doing the ramp test, which are you doing 1 minute increments or are you doing more than that?
For me, I'm doing the 5 minute warm up and then 1 minute increments times 9 to 12 of them.
Mhm.
How long it is if you obviously if you make your increments too high, you're not going to reach 9 minutes. If you make your increments too small, you're going to go over 12 minutes. So as you know, I use what I developed, which is a parameter check, which was determine which increments you should use for that person to achieve that. And I think I've gone through that before. I'm not sure if you want me to do that
Yeah.
again quickly.
Well, that's a task you can do beforehand without the
Yeah,
mask on, right? And you're doing heart
right.
rate, bring them up to certain heart rate, and then perceived exertion, a 6 out of a 10, what heart rate that is, and then a 9 out of a 10, what heart rate that is. And then you have a little calculation that we do to figure
Exactly.
out what the pace increments. So that helps. This is why I think it's so key to do that, because then you know how much to increase that amount on the test, the actual test. And because I find if you don't have that correct data, you're jumping up, is it too fast for them or they're going too slow? So to get
Right.
that perfect 9 to 12 minute actual test that we can make sure we're going to get there is, I feel that you have to do the pre-check test.
Yeah. And that's where that goes back to your discussion about, using standardized protocols. Like, no, there is no standard. There is a standard groupings within human beings. If you have an elite female cyclist, you could probably start them at 100 watts, and you're probably going to be going up 20 to 30 watts per. But that's not who comes through your doors all the
Mm.
time.
Yeah.
I know that after testing thousands and thousands of people, but I still do a parameter check because I don't know whether they have a strength deficit at the top end. And that has to do with so much to do with also picking the right modality for them to test on. One of the biggest mistakes I see is, standardized protocols, but also the wrong modality. If they're not going to ride a bike as part of their training, for God's sakes, don't test them on a bike.
Mm-hmm.
If they're a walker, then do a walking protocol.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That,
if they're running, you've got to think about what the purpose of having the data is, and quit just being a monkey and following protocols. It's sort of like, oh, you're mainly going to walk. Do you have hills around where you are? Ah, okay, great. We're going to do a speed increase, then an inclination increase, so we can see how you respond to these things, so we can understand the loads associated with what activity you're going to do and apply them.
and then, so if you have clients that you're testing that don't run, they have knee injury or they just don't like running and they just walk, and there's not really a lot of set protocols for that. So you just kind of guessing from the pre-test check of how much to increase. But if it's not the speed, they can't go up so much. And then it's incline after a while to help increase their heart rate to have some change in intensity every minute.
Correct. So some people try and combine speed and inclination together, and you're going, they're two totally different things. You can't compare the incremental change. So what I do, it's nice and simple. I find their walking speed 90 and 100.
Mm-hmm.
I ask them to go find their most comfortable walking speed. So I know the top end of my speeds. Now I've got a bottom end of my speed and a top end of my speed. Then I ask them the question, find me a 6 out of 10 at that speed using inclination. And they bring it up, let's say to 6%. And then they go, yeah, this is about a 6. So great. Bring it up to 9 out of 10 if you're going to do it for 2 minutes. And they bring it up to 12%. Great. Now you've got 0 to 12%, and you got a speed of, let's say, 2 to 4. Now you've got two parameters to adjust to make 9 to 12. So it's really simple.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's all about doing it in a way that you get the data that you need. So you be in charge and make sure that you're going to get the data you need that's applicable to that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a nine to 12 minute ramp, I always start that way. I find I've been analyzing data for so long. As you know, I use near-infrared spectroscopy with it, because I like to look at multiple metrics. Um, but I will also do what's referred to as X1X.
Hmm.
So meaning it could be a 313, a 414, a 515, right? So, but you do it for a totally different reason. So what you're doing, let's say if I'm working with an endurance athlete and their events are 2, 3 hours, they'll inherently tell you that a 9 to 12 minute ramp does not represent them. Well, it does represent their physiology, but it doesn't represent their activity. So I will follow that up with the 55-minute test.
Hmm.
But I use the information I get from my ramp test to go, I want to confirm that my zoning is correct. So I'll pick something from zone one as part of the warm up. I'll pick up something from zone two, zone three, zone four, and zone five. And what I'll do is everybody has different feelings and mainly about how long the work and rest is. So a lot of people are the Norwegians are promoting like a 313. A lot of people add the 1 minute rest in there because they want to stab them and take their blood.
Hmm.
Okay, that's why it's built in. You don't really have to do that. You can just do a longer protocol without a rest. Only reason why I do a rest is I want to see the recovery on their near-infrared spectroscopy. That's it. Otherwise, it's confusing to people. But what it does is allows you to be able to give a comparison of their first 3 minutes at that effort, followed by a second 3 minutes at that effort.
Hmm.
And you can compare those two, and you can look at it as 6 minutes over time, and you can see if it's fat max, or let's say it's zone two, what we should see is there's no difference because that's is I can do this intensity and it's the same amount of work for me physiologically.
Hmm.
So if you've got the first 3 minutes looks like this and the next 3 minutes looks like that, you don't have zone two. It's transitioning and responding to
Hmm.
it. So it's a different, again, I would never use it for VO2 maxing anyone. It's too long.
Hmm. Yeah.
But it gives me different information. So there, what's really important is that it's all about the data and your protocols and your parameters are all about making sure that you don't miss any of the data that you need to make good decisions.
Hmm. And to
And
find the
then,
right
yeah,
zoning.
oh, it's brutal to tell you the truth. Like most people don't even understand how their device finds zones. It just
Hmm.
punches up this nice report. You hand it to them, and you look at the reports and you go, "Oh, great, your zone one's 147 beats. You are freaking amazing." It's just ridiculous. Now, we need to understand that there's multiple methods of zoning. And one of the things I do like about the core is it gives you four different methods are commonly used. So things like percentage of VO2, heart rate of VO2 max, anaerobic thresholds, and then percentages of max heart rate from the test, etc. So it gives you four different options. And not only that, if it's a percentage based one, Core gives you the ability to be able to change the percentages. It gives you the standard ones that are out there, but if you don't agree with that, you can change them.
But that's not mathematical equation as you've taught us. It's data collecting percentage of the data that you collected. You're not using some mathematical formula now because now you have the
It's all
data.
it's all it's all math because it's all based upon finding one point during the test.
Mm.
So if
Okay.
it's anaerobic threshold, it's that, and there's even ways of subdefining anaerobic threshold.
I was going to
So
say, isn't there not a thing, aerobic versus anaerobic? It's the
yes,
changing fuel system. Did you, one that
right.
taught me that?
Exactly. So there's a lot of people that have only O2 that say that they can do anaerobic and aerobic threshold. You're going, no, you can't because it's RER based and you need O2 and CO2. So it's a lie. It's ventilatory thresholds. That's true because they're using VE.
Hmm.
All right. So you know my feelings on VE. It's two metrics combined of which you don't know whether that combination is from a very positive thing or a very bad thing. So I hate VE over VO2, VE, CO2, yet that's how a lot of people work. Anaerobic threshold, there's a myriad ways of calculating it. We use the most common, like a V-slope method, but we give you two, a metabolic or a ventilatory method. So we're the only device out there that respects your choices. And it allows you to change and toggle between those choices because at times that's how you get the best zones.
Mm.
Is you go, in this particular case with this person, how they're breathing, it'd be better to get a metabolic than a ventilatory. So you just simply say, I want to change anaerobic threshold for that person by using a different methodology. And it allows you to select it. Whereas most devices, like I said, they have one method hidden, won't tell you what it is.
Yeah.
So I I spend a lot of time, and I teach this a lot. It every time, and I'm working on an AI system to determine whether what metric we can use consistently. And the answer is none. It needs to be specific to that person. And we're not overwhelmed by that. We knew that before we started. It was sort of like, how can we teach an AI system to determine when to throw out certain metrics? So, for example, if somebody has read too much oxygen advantage and are messing up their breathing, um, they'll change how fat and carbohydrate is utilized, right? They have no idea
Mm.
they're actually messing everything up. And therefore, spots that we would normally find will be delayed. They think that's positive, it's not, you know. So you can't use certain metrics with them
Mm.
because they're not doing things naturally. They're not allowing the feedback loops to work and allowing their brain to be able to control the systems in a way that maintains homeostasis at the cell. So the answer is you've got to look at, can you identify with each person what method is the best? And as you know, my feeling is individual zoning anyway. And with Core allows me to be able to hit the manual mode and I look at each person's test and I choose different methodology for different people on how I zone them.
Got it. So in
So
summary, to get the most accurate zoning from people's tests, their exercise tests, what would be kind of the takeaway for people doing the test or getting the test done to know, okay, are these zones accurate for me right now? So I can follow this program for next 3 months and get retested.
I would say that number one, make sure you get tested on a device that has O2 and CO2 because the best metric for zoning zone one and two is fat and carbohydrate. So if you have a choice and you're a person being tested, for God's sakes, find out if their device is O2 and CO2. If you're buying a device, understand your physiology well enough that having O2 does not give you the information that you need to be fully analytical and make really good decisions. So I would say making sure you're being tested on the right device, and ask them, what zoning method are you using? Not five zones. I mean, how did you use? Did you use anaerobic threshold? Did you
Mm.
use percentage of VO2 max? Did you use percentage of heart rate max? You know, what methods did you use to be able to determine my zones? Or did you even bother looking at them? Did you do it or did the machine do it for you?
Mhm.
So you want people that actually know what they're doing with their device, doing the analysis.
Yeah. Do you find it easier to start with identifying their zone two first when you're doing
Hmm.
the manual?
Yeah, zone one, zone two, using fat and carbohydrate.
Hmm.
It's delightful to be able to go in there and be able to use those things. A lot of people are using inappropriate points in there. They don't understand what a fat max is. They don't understand that if you pick crossover for the top of zone two, you've already gone into zone three. They don't understand basic things on how to be able to use the data. So zoning is not zoning is not zoning. It's really what data they have. Did they start slow enough? It goes all the way back through our whole conversation. Did they have the right device? Did they build your protocol correctly to be able to identify all these spots? And did they know how to look at the data to be able to determine, number one, how did I perform? Where do I suck? And what my zones are, so I know that the intensities given to me will change my physiology in a way that will benefit me through improving my medical condition, my longevity and health, or my function and performance.
So what do you find is the most benefits for people doing these testing for the three different categories we spoke about, the fat loss or weight loss, or rather lean body mass increase program,
Yeah.
and then performance and then longevity. So looking at those three, kind of what would you think would be top of your head for top benefit for the weight loss category?
Um, God, the answer is I don't know until I test them, right? It's sort of like you can take an obese person and they can have high lean muscle mass and a high basal metabolic rate
Hmm.
if they're active. So let's say you take a let's say a 50-year-old construction worker that's been working in construction for 30 years. You may find that they have a fast metabolic rate, and therefore you're not going to look at resistance and you're not going to worry about that. You're going to look at their fat and carbohydrate utilization, but really it's going to be a lot to do with just caloric deficit with that person, match with the right exercise programming to achieve their goals. But you'll have other people that will be 30% fat, 70% carbohydrate with a low BMR,
Mhm.
and your approach has to be so different. It tells you that there needs to be a super strong nutritional approach to this, and that whatever exercise you choose, you don't want to throw them into carbohydrate use. So
So
it's going to have
this,
to be super low intensity. So it's,
yeah.
yeah,
But that's the benefit, right? So really what we're saying is that you're going to get a personalized program. If you're struggling losing weight, you're not getting anywhere, or the other category I think is becoming GLP-1 people that lost weight and they want to get off the medication and how to help them stay off of it and
yeah,
what to do differently. But I think the weight loss one is key. The personalization is what I hear you saying.
yeah. Well, I work with a chief bariatric surgeon from New York
Mm.
City, and he was absolutely gobsmacked. Like I taught him my side of the world, and then he tested them pre and post surgery. So losing, 100, 150 pounds, there was no change in their physiology. They were still burning the same amount of fat and carbohydrate. If they were slow, they're still slow. So it hasn't changed their physiology. So that's what's really important to understand is you're still left with all the problems that were there. And that's why people, if they have reversals of their bariatric surgery, they'll just regain all their weight because nothing's changed.
Mhm.
So I'm with you. I couldn't do my job, and I would refuse to do my job if I didn't have this information to be able to ensure that I was being as effective and efficient with my programming that will end up in positive results and their goals. Sometimes you have to argue about their goals because their goals are wrong.
Mhm.
They understand they're about goal three, and you have to get back to goal one. To
Yeah.
be able to say, okay, let's do these two goals first, and then we'll get you to goal three.
Order of
So
operations, I would say, where to
yeah,
start.
exactly.
Yeah. Well,
It's a 30 years in the army makes me very strategic in how I do things. So
is that why your company is called Strategic Health and Performance?
it is. That was it.
So I know we're out of time, but what else could we say is what people should look out for when they're doing testing, how to get the most out of it?
Yeah, I would really ask again, O2 and CO2.
Yeah.
So just make sure that they've got a device that will allow them to be able to test fat and carbohydrate use. Um, ask if it includes a detailed review and analysis of your results and also programming. That if they're just going to hand you a report at the end and say, thank you for coming in, that's $180, don't go there. They probably don't know how to explain it, or they're not willing to do it and maximize the benefits of doing the testing.
Yeah.
You don't want people like that. You want people who are excited about what they do and they want to show you how that data pertains to you and why you're going to be doing the things that we're asking you to do in the order that we're asking you to do it.
And I think adding to that, I make sure I do a big and long health history form that we have from the whole practice. Nutritional therapy company started this, and a 5-day food and mood exercise journal. Let me know what are you doing now, so then we can look at the big picture and help really personalize the program, because you need to know what the client's doing now, what's working, what's not working, what their goals are and what they want to happen. Then we might identify what they should be really thinking as a goal for them that they might not have realized.
I never look at my form until afterwards, because I just confirm whether what I saw in their physiology is represented in it.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, you can never go wrong with just doing something different. It's an old rule in strength and conditioning, right? Find out what they've been doing and do something different, and that change will cause some adaptation in a different way. So, and this is where, like, when you get into respiratory limitations, it's a whole different world. I talked to a respiratory physiologist today, and he said, what do you use for respiratory training? I said, well, it depends what the limitation is. It's got to be that specific. So, I think, when I design things myself, how do I differentiate myself from somebody down the road who doesn't do any of the things that I do? They don't do the advanced analytics. They don't do the advanced programming. Yet they're charging the same amount as I do. So you're never going to know for the price. Because some of us will do it at a lower price just because we love what we do. So do ask about, like I said, ask about the equipment that they use. Not all equipment is created equal. You really do. It won't cost you any more to find somebody who has a device that tests with O2 and CO2 than it will for somebody who has O2 only. So go find somebody else.
Yeah. Well, great. And where can people learn more if they want to do analysis or training with you or follow up on their lab testing results?
Yeah. Through Strategic, I've just been finishing up the final edits for a 4-module education program. So it will be exercise physiology related to metabolic analysis in module 1. It'll be testing in module 2. It'll be analysis in module 3, and it'll be programming in module 4, which is very logical. It's about 40 hours of material online. So that will be released, I'm hoping, by the end of January.
Wow.
And it's a very thorough program. It's called exactly that: Physiological Testing, Analysis, and Programming Certification. And I've had PhDs take it, and I've had people who have never worked in physiology before take it, and I get the same comments. It's really, it's hard because I hate to say it, but physiology is complicated. But I do it in a way that can take either end of that spectrum of knowledge, and teach everybody something in it with a different approach to it.
Amazing. Well, I'll have to look at that. It's always good to review. Can never get enough of the exercise physiology at the cellular level in the Krebs cycle and how it all works. It's always
good
biochemistry.
To review every now and then. Biochemistry can be entertaining.
Yes, it is. So, well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time again to go deep dive in how we can improve our test experience and get the correct data from it and how to use that data.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for listening to the Fit and Healthy Athlete Podcast. Coach Debbie Potts draws from decades of experience. Ready to optimize your health? Visit www.debbiepotts.net for a discovery call. Find her on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at Coach Debbie Potts. To support the show, like, rate, and review. See you next time.